In the dim light of a tavern, amid the smell of tar and cheap rum, a single coin changed a sailor's fate. Elias Drake, who had simply wanted to avoid a fight, saw in the eyes of a beaten stranger an echo of his past, a past from which he had fled across 3 oceans. Now, with his own specter of guilt rearing its head, he must decide. Save the stranger and lose everything, or leave and remain forever in the shadows. The tavern stank of tar, sweat, and the copper tang of fresh blood. Lantern lights swung in reckless arcs, painting the faces of the roaring crowd the color of old bruises. Elias Drake nursed his 3rd tot of blackstrap rum and told himself, again, that none of this was his fight. His own knuckles still carried the scabs from last week's brawl over a rigged dice game. Another scar would only make the bosun's rope harder to grip come dawn. But when the one-eyed brute, Torvald the Dane, slammed the smaller man against the keg rack, something in Elias's chest twisted like a frayed hawser about to snap. The stranger was barely older than Elias's kid brother, had been the day the press gang took him. Blood bubbled at his split lip. His left eye had already swollen shut. Torvald's fist rose again, gleaming with rings that could crack a jaw like kindling. The crowd bayed for the kill. Somewhere a fiddle kept screeching, oblivious. Elias's fingers found the dented doubloon in his pocket. His last silver, meant for ship stores. He could walk away, sail at first light, forget the tavern by sunrise. Yet the beaten man raised his head a fraction, fixed Elias with a single pleading eye, and whispered 3 words that cut through the rum and the roar. Remember this night. The phrase struck Elias like a belaying pin to the skull. 3 years earlier, on another rum-soaked night, his brother Samuel had mouthed the same plea while a press gang closed in. Elias had frozen then, hiding in the alley shadows, and Samuel had vanished into the Royal Navy's hungry maw. The guilt had ridden Elias across 3 oceans. Now the past looped cruelly. Same plea, same tremble in the voice. Torvald's fist cocked higher. The candle flames guttered as if the room itself held its breath. Elias shoved to his feet. Splinters bit his palm where it braced on the sticky table. Enough, he said. But the word vanished beneath the crowd's roar. Torvald never hesitated. The punch descended like a club. Elias moved. He wasn't a large man, 5'8" in sea boots, but years hauling lines had knotted muscle to whipcord. He caught Torvald's wrist mid-swing, felt the jolt travel up his arm like lightning along a spar. For a heartbeat the tavern froze. Rum cups halfway to lips, dice suspended mid-roll, fiddle squealing into silence. Torvald's single pale eye narrowed. Walk away, sailor. This dog owes me coin. Looks like he's paying interest, Elias muttered. His pulse hammered at his temples. One wrong move and he'd be the next body on the sawdust. The Dane yanked free, shoving Elias back a step. You volunteering to settle his debt? Elias felt the doubloon's edge bite his thumb. Enough for passage to Havana, maybe a new start. He thought of Samuel shoved into a longboat, never seen again. He thought of the stranger's bruises blooming like storm clouds. With my fists, if I must, Elias said. The words left his mouth before fear could muzzle them. A collective intake of breath rippled through the crowd. Wagers changed hands in frantic whispers. Torvald's grin was all broken teeth and malice. Behind him the stranger sagged against the barrels, chest heaving. One shaking hand clutched something small, a tarnished coin, and pressed it to his cracked lips as though sealing a promise. Torvald cracked his knuckles. 3 rounds. If you're breathing at the end, he walks. Elias's stomach lurched, but he nodded. No backing out now without losing face and maybe teeth. The circle widened, boots scraping over sticky floors. Candle smoke curled like ghosts above their heads. Round 1. Torvald charged like a wounded boar. Elias ducked, felt the wind of the blow ruffle his hair, and countered with a sharp jab to the ribs. Pain flared in his knuckles, like hitting oak, but the Dane grunted, surprised. Round 2. Torvald feinted left, then drove a hammer fist toward Elias's temple. Stars exploded. The room tilted. Elias tasted iron. Through blurred vision he saw the stranger watching, eyes wide, lips moving soundlessly. Remember. Round 3. Elias let instinct guide him, years of brawls on pitching decks. He sidestepped, grabbed Torvald's belt, and used the man's own momentum to slam him into a keg. Wood cracked. Ale gushed like a tide of gold. Torvald crashed to the floor, dazed. Silence. Then a roar, half disbelief, half admiration. Coins clattered as losing bets were paid. Torvald groaned, tried to rise, and collapsed again. Elias swayed, blood dripping from his nose to mingle with ale and sawdust. The stranger limped forward, pressed the tarnished coin into Elias's palm, and closed his fingers over it. The metal was warm, surprisingly so. "Name's Calder," the stranger rasped. "Debt repaid, but not forgotten." Before Elias could reply, Calder melted into the dispersing crowd, leaving only the coin as proof the night had been real. A skull stamped on one side, an anchor on the other. Elias turned it over, heart still racing, and wondered what chain of events he'd just forged. Outside, the tide had turned. The Meridian would sail on the ebb. Elias pocketed the coin, tasted salt and copper on his tongue, and stepped into the fog-shrouded street. Somewhere beyond the next swell, destiny waited, sharp as a cutlass and twice as unforgiving. He didn't yet know that 5 years later, on a blood-red dawn, Calder would stand between Elias and a mutinous crew with muskets leveled at his chest. But the coin in his pocket hummed like a promise kept. Would you have stepped into that circle, knowing one punch could shatter your future, or someone else's last hope? Drop a yes or an O below, then brace for what comes next. The Meridian cut through the Atlantic swells like a blade hunting flesh. Salt crusted every spar. The scent of tar mixed with the reek of bilge and unwashed bodies. Elias Drake stood on the effortlessly, night wind needling his coat, and tried not to think about the noose that waited if Captain Rourke ever learned the crew whispered mutiny. 5 years had passed since the tavern. 5 years of floggings, short rations, and the slow rot of men turned into beasts. The skull coin hung cold against his chest beneath sweat-soaked linen. A reminder, a promise, a fuse. Behind him the ship groaned. Ahead, an uncharted island shimmered on the horizon like a mirage of salvation or damnation. Rourke claimed it held gold enough to buy pardons for every sin. The crew believed him, until the navigator disappeared overboard during last night's storm. Throats slit ear to ear, charts vanishing with him. Now only Rourke knew the safe channel, and the crew's hungry eyes said that was one secret too many for one man to keep. Elias's fingers found the coin. On its anchor side, tiny nicks spelled coordinates scratched by a dying man. Calder. The stranger he'd once saved in a candlelit tavern now served aboard the Meridian under an assumed name. Same scarred cheek, same haunted stare, biding time until the debt between them came due. 3 bells into the dog watch, Calder approached along the rail, moonlight painting his face silver and savage. "Storm's coming," he murmured, voice barely louder than the creak of timbers. "Men are talking. They'll move at first light." Elias glanced toward the quarterdeck where Rourke stood silhouetted against the binnacle lamp, pistol glinting at his hip. "We don't have first light," he said. "We have tonight." Calder's grin was grim. "Then choose, mate. Stand with the captain and swing when the crew wins, or stand with the crew and swing if the Navy catches us. Either way, there's hemp in someone's future." A gust whipped Elias's coat. Spray lashed his cheeks like needles of ice. He thought of Samuel, his brother, pressed into service, never seen again. Thought of the flogging post where Rourke had reduced a boy of 16 to raw meat for stealing a biscuit. Thought of the coin warming against his skin, its skull grinning up at him like fate personified. From below came muffled voices, the scrape of steel on whetstone, the hollow thud of a barrel being broached too soon. The scent of rum drifted on the wind, liquid courage for men about to gamble their lives. Calder leaned closer. "Navigator's blood is still on Rourke's sleeve. You saw the blade. You know what he's capable of when cornered." Elias closed his fist around the coin until the edges bit. "And you know what I'm capable of when I decide to stop running." A shout erupted from the main hatch, angry, fearful. Boots thundered on companion ladders. Through the gloom Elias saw shadows massing near the forecastle, heard the unmistakable clack of muskets being primed. The mutiny had begun ahead of schedule. Rourke spun, pistol raised, voice booming over the sudden hush. "Back to your posts, dogs. The first man to step forward gets a bullet in the teeth." For a heartbeat the ship balanced on the edge of chaos. Waves slapped the hull like slow applause. Then a single voice rose from the dark. A voice Elias recognized too late. "Captain Rourke," the sailor called. "The crew votes you unfit. Step down peaceful or step overboard." Rourke laughed. The sound cracked and wild. "Votes? This isn't a bloody parliament." Steel flashed. A musket roared. Splinters exploded from the fife rail beside Elias's head. Screams, curses, the thud of bodies. In the melee Rourke's eyes found Elias across the deck, narrowed with sudden understanding. "You," Rourke snarled, leveling the pistol. "I should have known when you wore that coin like a medal." Calder stepped between them, cutlass gleaming. "Back away, Captain. The debt's mine to settle." But Rourke was already pulling the trigger. Flame blossomed. Calder jerked, crimson blooming on his shirt. Time slowed. Elias saw the skull coin tumble from Calder's fingers, spinning through lantern light before clinking to the deck. Without thinking, without breathing, Elias scooped the coin, felt its warm metal burn like a brand. Around him the mutiny surged, a tide of desperation and fury. Rourke vanished into the crush, pistol lost, dagger drawn. Calder dropped to one knee, hand pressed to his side, blood seeping between fingers. "Don't let it end here," he rasped. "Promise me." "Promise what?" Elias wanted to ask, but the deck tilted violently as men grappled and blades clashed. Somewhere a lantern shattered. Flames licked up the mainsail like hungry ghosts. Elias hauled Calder toward the rail, every heartbeat a hammer against his ribs. The coin in his fist seemed to pulse with its own life, whispering the coordinates scratched into its surface. An island, a chance, a future written in salt and blood. Behind them Rourke's voice rose above the din, raw with triumph and terror. "Burn the ship if you must, but I'll see her sunk before I lose what's mine." Elias met Calder's eyes, fever bright, unafraid. "We finish what started in that tavern," he said, echoing words spoken years ago in candle smoke and fear. The deck shuddered as the first cask of powder exploded below. Timbers screamed. Overhead, the island's silhouette grew larger, black against a blood-red dawn. Microcliff plus viewer choice. The ship is burning, the crew divided, the island unknown. If you were Elias, would you steer toward the island and risk the unknown, or try to quell the mutiny and risk Rourke's revenge? Type island or mutiny below. Your choice shapes tomorrow's chapter. The lantern Rourke smashed didn't just spill fire, it spilled truth. Flames sprinted up the mainsail like rats on a hawser, and in their red glare every scar on Elias's life story flashed bright. The meridian groaned, timbers popping like pistol shots. Below deck, 3 barrels of black powder lay in a puddled fuse as thin as whipcord. One spark and the ship would bloom into a sunrise no man on board would ever see. Calder leaned against the rail, blood bubbling between the fingers pressed to his ribs. "Island's coordinates," he rasped, jerking his chin toward the skull coin Elias still clenched. "North-northeast. Reefs on the lee side, only chance before the keel burns out." Behind them, steel rang. Mutineers pressed Captain Rourke against the quarterdeck ladder, cutlasses at his throat. Yet the tyrant's grin was wild, almost grateful. "You think the island buys you freedom?" he sneered. "It's a graveyard with palm trees. I marked it on charts I never meant to share." Elias flipped the coin. The stamped anchor glinted. Those tiny nicks, latitude 17 degrees 34 minutes north, longitude 62 degrees 11 minutes west, were etched by Calder the night Elias carried him from a Tortuga tavern floor. Destiny, it seemed, had been stamped in silver years ago and was now asking for payment in flames. A gust carried sparks across the deck. Men flinched, eyes reflecting orange pinwheels. Elias tasted smoke and the iron tang of panic. The powder fuse below hissed like a nest of vipers. Dawn was a blade of pale light on the horizon, maybe 10 minutes before the sun exposed them to any warship patrolling the Windward Passage. "Choose," Calder urged, voice ragged. "Steer for the island, and we might live long enough to bury our dead. Stay and fight Rourke's war. We all sink with the gold still locked in the hold." Rourke spat blood. "Gold's cursed. I should have left it to the sharks." Elias's mind fractured. Images collided. Samuel's face the night the press gang took him. The flogged boy lashed for a stolen biscuit. Calder pressing the coin into his palm like a sacred oath. Guilt, loyalty, survival, each demanded a different future. A timber exploded below, showering sparks. The deck lurched. The wheel spun free, yawing the meridian toward the reef. Elias lunged, caught a spoke, muscles screaming as he fought the ship's drunken veer. Flame licked his sleeve. He slapped it out with a curse. "Island course," he barked at the helmsman. A boy no older than Samuel had been. The lad's eyes were wide moons, but he obeyed, spinning the wheel. Rourke's charts fluttered overboard like burning prayers. But betrayal struck faster than tide. The bosun, Jory, stepped from the smoke, pistol leveled. "Sorry, Drake." Crew voted. "We take the longboat, scuttle the rest. No room for heroes." Calder's laugh turned wet. "Hero? You'll starve before you sight land." Jory's finger whitened on the trigger, then hesitated as Elias raised the skull coin between them. The silver caught the firelight, reflecting Jory's own greed back at him. For a heartbeat, the coin became a mirror, a question, an accusation. Elias spoke soft but clear. "This coin bought one life once. It'll buy passage for every man who stands down. Islands 3 leagues, reef channel at dawn. One sail, one chance. You want the gold? Help me steer or we all feed the sharks." Wind roared through torn canvas. Flames licked the mizzenmast. Jory's pistol wavered. Below, the powder fuse hissed louder. Seconds now. Elias locked eyes with Calder. "Can you still haul a line?" Calder's grin was blood and fire. "For the island? I'll crawl through hell." Rourke, forgotten, laughed from the deck. "You'll crawl through worse." The ship shuddered. A thunderous crack split the mainmast. Burning canvas cascaded like a comet. Elias felt the deck tilt, starboard planks giving way to hungry waves. He seized Calder's shoulder. "Take the wheel." Then, to the crew, voice cutting through smoke. "Cut the longboat free if you want, but the tide's turning. Reef'll rip the keel before you clear the breakers. Last man aboard the skiff burns with the rest." Jory lowered the pistol. 3 minutes, Drake. Prove the channel exists." Elias sprinted aft, boots skidding on embers. He slashed the fuse with his knife, 1 inch from the powder keg. Flame licking his sleeve. The hissing stopped. Silence louder than cannon fire. Overhead, the mast groaned, leaning like a dying oak. Dawn blazed crimson across the water. Through the smoke, palm-fringed silhouettes glimmered, either salvation or a mirage. Elias turned to the crew, coin raised high. "Island or mutiny? Decide fast." The masts coming down. Flames crackled. Timbers creaked. Every heartbeat was a drum counting down to oblivion. Interactive cliffhanger. The powder still waits. The mast leans. The island beckons. If you were Elias, would you trust the reef and race for the unknown shore? Or cut the longboat loose and gamble on open sea? Type reef or boat before the mast falls. The powder keg hissed like a snake tasting air. Elias's knife had sliced the fuse an inch from disaster. But sparks still chewed the hemp, racing for 3 barrels stacked beneath the meridian's waterline. 1 spark, 1 heartbeat, and 40 souls would become red mist and splinters. Calder clutched the rail, blood bubbling between his teeth. "Masts going," he roared. Above them the mainmast leaned, then screamed, then cracked. 50 feet of flaming timber arced through dawn sky and speared the deck. Fire exploded outward. Men dove for cover. Elias felt the ship lurch, starboard rail dipping toward the black Atlantic. The island loomed dead ahead, jagged reef teeth glinting like daggers in sunrise. Waves smashed coral, throwing spray 30 feet high. Beyond the reef, a hidden lagoon, sand the color of fresh bread, and, if Rourke's charts spoke true, a Spanish chest heavy enough to ransom every man aboard. But the chest was locked in the captain's cabin, and the cabin was now an inferno. Elias flipped the skull coin in his palm, anchor side up, skull side down, then shoved it between his teeth and sprinted. Embers stung his cheeks. Smoke clawed his lungs. He burst through the cabin door, heat slamming him like a fist. Flames raced along maps, devoured charts, licked the iron strongbox beneath the bunk. The lock glowed red. Elias ripped off his coat, wrapped his hands, and smashed the lock with a broken belaying pin. Hinges shrieked. The lid flew open. Inside lay canvas bags of coin, yes, but also a pistol, primed, pointed at his heart. Captain Rourke stepped from the shadows, face streaked with soot and madness. "Thought you'd leave me to burn, Drake?" Behind Rourke, the powder fuse snapped. Another inch gone, 2 seconds closer to oblivion. Elias tasted copper. "We all burn if we stay." Rourke's grin was all teeth and blood. "Then let the fire judge us." He pulled the trigger. Click. Misfire. Elias lunged. The two men collided, crashing into the strongbox. Coins cascaded like golden hail. Rourke's dagger flashed. Elias caught his wrist, twisted. Steel clattered across flaming planks. Outside, the mast toppled completely. The ship yawed. The reef howled. Calder appeared in the doorway, shirt soaked crimson, eyes wild. 30 seconds, Elias. Choose. Elias slammed Rourke's head against the bunk rail. The captain slumped, unconscious. Coins spilled into a canvas sack as Elias roared, "Grab the charts. Whatever's left." Calder snatched a half-burned map, shoved it into Elias's chest. Together they staggered from the cabin as flames kissed the powder barrels. On deck, chaos. Mutineers and loyalists grappled, blinded by smoke. The island cliffed closer, white coral teeth ready to chew hull from keel. Elias leapt to the wheel. Calder collapsed beside him, pressing the canvas sack against his wound. "Reef channel's starboard bow," Calder panted. 3 fathoms, no deeper. Miss it, we're coral chum. Elias spun the wheel. The ship groaned, heeling hard. Sparks showered from the rigging. Below, the powder fuse hissed louder, like a countdown to eternity. A musket cracked. Jory, the bosun, stood on the forecastle, eyes wide with betrayal. "You promised us gold and glory, Drake. Now you burn it all." He fired again. The shot splintered the wheel inches from Elias's hand. Calder raised the fallen pistol, still warm from Rourke's misfire, and fired without aiming. Jory toppled backward into the flames. 10 seconds. The reef thundered ahead, white water exploding skyward. Elias felt the keel kiss coral, scrape, then lift free. A narrow channel yawned, black water between white fangs. 5 seconds. He shoved Calder toward the skiff lashed amidships. "Cut her loose. Row for the beach." Calder shook his head, blood dripping from his chin. "Not without you." Elias pressed the skull coin into Calder's palm. "Debt repaid," he whispered, echoing words spoken years ago in candle smoke. "Now save yourself." 3 seconds. Elias dove for the powder fuse, knife flashing. The hemp was burning faster than breath. He sliced once, twice, felt sparks bite his wrist. The fuse died. Silence. Then the mainmast, fully ablaze, crashed across the deck. Sparks exploded upward. The Meridian lurched one final time, sliding between coral jaws into the hidden lagoon. Smoke cleared. Sand glimmered 20 yards ahead. Elias stood at the rail, chest heaving. Behind him, the ship burned to the waterline. At his feet, the canvas sack of gold gleamed like captured stars. Calder gripped the skiff's rope, eyes wide. From the burning cabin, Rourke's voice rose, weak but defiant. "You'll hang for this, Drake. Every navy from here to London will hunt you." Elias looked at the island. Palm fronds waving in warm breeze, sand untouched by man or war. Then he looked at Calder, coin clenched between them. Interactive cliffhanger. Powder still waits below deck, The gold is heavy. The island is close, and Rourke's voice carries across the water like a curse. If you were Elias, would you torch the ship to erase all evidence and start fresh, or save Rourke and face trial? Type burn or save below. The fuse isn't dead yet. 10 summers after the Meridian burned, the sun rose over New Bedford Harbor like a gold coin flipped by God. Elias Drake stood on the wharf, beard salted white, eyes still sea-sharp. The cutlass scar across his ribs had faded to pale lightning, but the weight of the skull coin in his pocket felt heavier than any treasure chest. Behind him, the newly christened Liberty's prize rocked at anchor. His ship now, built from the timbers that had once carried him into mutiny and exile. He watched the gangplank for the boy he hadn't seen since the night Calder pressed a second coin, identical to the first, into Elias's palm and whispered, "For my son, when he's ready." The boy came at dawn, 16 summers old, same scarred cheek his father wore like a badge, same storm-gray eyes. He carried no sea bag, only the coin on a leather cord around his neck, anchor side up. He stopped 3 feet from Elias and spoke 3 words that cracked the years open. "Remember this night." Elias's throat closed, the tavern candle smoke, the blood on sawdust, the powder fuse hissing like a snake. Every memory slammed home at once. The boy extended his hand. "Name's Calder too. My father said you'd know the debt." Elias took the coin, thumb tracing the skull's hollow eyes. "Debt paid 10 times over, lad. Your father's bones rest beneath palms on an island no chart names. I carved his name into the trunk of the tree that shaded his grave." Young Calder's gaze swept the Liberty's prize, fresh canvas, brass railings gleaming like sunrise. "He said you'd teach me the difference between a sailor and a man." A gull cried overhead. Elias felt the years peel away. He reached into his coat and drew out the original coin, now worn smooth by salt and prayer. He pressed the 2 coins together. The edges aligned perfectly, anchor to anchor, skull to skull. "Your father gave me a future," Elias said. "I give it back to you doubled." Behind them, the crew of the Liberty's prize gathered, men and women whose scars told the same story. Mutiny, exile, redemption. Among them stood Jory's widow, her hands steady on a coil of rope. The cook who once smuggled bread to flogged boys. The navigator who'd redrawn Rourke's burned charts with lines of hope. Elias raised his voice so every soul on the dock could hear. "This ship sails for the island at dawn. Not for gold, there's none left, but for the tree that bears a father's name. We'll take saplings and stories, plant them in every port where tyrants once ruled. Courage is a crop that grows best when watered by memory." Young Calder stepped aboard. The deck rang with the echo of his boots, same rhythm his father had walked the night he took a bullet meant for Elias. The boy touched the mast, fingers tracing the carved words Elias had chiseled the day the keel was laid. "Remember." A breeze filled the sails. The crew cast off lines. From the quarterdeck Elias looked back once. At the harbor, at the past, at the ghosts of men who'd chosen honor over safety. He flipped the twin coins into the air. They spun, caught the sun, and clinked together in his palm like 2 heartbeats finding the same rhythm. "Ready?" he asked the boy. Calder fastened the coin around his own neck, anchor side out. "Ready to remember." As the Liberty's prize cleared the harbor mouth, the rising sun painted the water crimson and gold, the same colors that had lit the Meridian's final night. But this time the glow promised life, not death. Elias felt the coins warm against his chest, heard the whisper of waves against the hull, and knew the debt was finally settled. Not repaid, transcended. One act of courage had become a fleet of futures. On the horizon, the island waited, palm fronds waving like old friends, coral reefs gleaming like guardians. Somewhere beneath the tallest palm, a carved name faced the sea, watching over every ship that dared to choose kindness over fear. Elias turned the wheel toward the rising sun. Behind him, the crew sang an old sea shanty, Calder's father's favorite, voices rising like gulls on the wind. And as the first notes carried across the water, Elias whispered the 3 words that had started it all, now spoken not in desperation but in triumph. "Remember this night." Final invitation. If this ending stirred your soul, tap subscribe for tomorrow's tale. The widow who fed 300 outlaws and saved a town. The next story begins where courage leaves off.